Michelangelo. What an interesting individual, the man and the artist. In order to understand who he was, you need to understand something about where he was from. And you all know that the country of Italy is shaped like a boot. And here on the far west side, right on the coast, is Rome and Vatican City. Up toward the north, because the country goes clear up into here, is called Florence. And Florence is one of the great art capitals because it's where he spent much of his life. And much of his art is still in Florence. And so I wanted to have you have an idea of where this is about. And his hometown is right down in here. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a closer map because this is Florence. The name of his hometown, when he was born there, is Caprice. They have since changed the name, and they now call it Caprice Michelangelo. If the most famous artist in the history of the world was born in your town, would you probably include his name in the name of the town? Yes, you probably would. And they did. And so it's right here. Okay, this is what the town looks like. The town is absolutely a gorgeous setting. It's literally sitting on top of rolling hills. It looks like somebody just scooped up dirt, put trees everywhere, and then put houses and buildings right on the top of it. And it is absolutely lovely. This is the cloud cover, so it sticks up a ways. It is just a beautiful, beautiful setting. And this is his family home. This is the home that he grew up in. And it's obviously become a tourist attraction for very obvious reasons. And what they've done, very interestingly, is that on the inside of the home, they've turned it into almost like an art gallery, and they have copies of his work throughout. And so it looks like he has just kind of left, and he's gone for a little while, but there's work all over the place of his, and he's going to be coming back any minute and come back and keep on working, as it were. This is one of the rooms. This is one of the other rooms, and they've even got here several replica statues that he worked on. And the detail is not real easy for you to see, but this was actually, it's a scene, it's part of what is known as the Battle of the Centaurs, and that is something that he created when he was 15 years old. And it's 30 feet, it's just gigantic, and they've made a miniature of it, but it's really quite an interesting thing, and they've got several copies of statues and areas where he could be working if he were still there. He was born in 1475, and he lived until 1564. So he lived to be 89 years old. So some of you can relate, you know, that he was, and he was productive right clear to the end of his life. It was amazing what he was working on, even at the very end. And he was just constantly, he was literally a workaholic. 15 hours a day was usually considered an average day for him. And 6 days a week was not uncommon at all. He was also devoutly Catholic. And he did take Sundays off, but it kind of aggravated him that he couldn't go back to work. But many of the things that he was working on had to do with the Catholic Church and in their buildings. And so they didn't really want him working there on those kind of days. When he was 13 years old, he went to his father and said, "I'm done with school." Now, have any of your kids ever come up and tried to have that conversation with you as a young teenager? "Oh, I don't need school. I'm so big and bad and tough. I can do anything I want, and I'm so talented, and I know everything." And did you ever have a conversation like that? And they come up to you and they try to tell you, as if with all of their life experience at 13 and 14 and 15, They know all it's going to take to succeed in the world. And you're going, sure, kid. He had that conversation with his father. And he went up to his father, and his father is a banker, which implies some education. It implies a pretty reasonable social status. Michelangelo was one of 5 sons, and they all came fairly close. They were within 13 years of each other, and Mom literally died after about 6 months after the birth of the 5th, and was pretty well wiped out. And so Dad was constantly looking for ways of taking care of his kids and getting help, and he often would hire wet nurses. And the son, Michelangelo, as a child, was sent out to a wet nurse. And what's interesting about that process is that wet nurses, husband and brothers, all were they were all sculptors. And Michelangelo often said that in the milk of my wet nurse, I enjoyed the use of hammers and chisels and learned it. And so he was around that sort of thing even as an infant, which makes it kind of interesting. Now we're going to fast forward back to 13, and he sits his father down and says, I'm done with school. And his father said, I don't necessarily think so. I don't think that's a good idea. And Michelangelo was, as a child, was pretty well determined to do what he wanted to do. And he said, Dad, this is the deal. I think that I have some talent in art. And what I really want to do is I want to go and become an apprentice to this guy. This guy's name is Domenico Giraldi. And if you're Italian, I'm going to apologize right now for possibly messing up the pronunciation, okay? But anyway. And as I looked at it, this guy is actually a sculptor and painter. And he took Michelangelo as a 13-year-old boy as an apprentice. Now, I've often wondered about this picture. Is the picture, does he really have a scar like this on his forehead, or is that an age where the paint has cracked, which is much more logical? However, he may have one of the ugliest noses I've ever seen. Okay? Plug ugly nose, and it's really, to say bulbous is kind of a polite way of putting it, but anyway, yes, it would be a compliment calling it bulbous, but interesting individual. And at the end of 1 year, this guy sat Michelangelo down and said, I'm going to recommend to send you on to a different art school because I think you have a level of talent that I think I'm not sure I can completely help you grow. I want to send you to a better school. At the age of 14? Really? Wow. Okay. Let me introduce you to the next guy. This guy's name is Lorenzo de' Medici. And if you know anything about the Renaissance, the de' Medici family is huge. Over the centuries, they've had popes, they've had cardinals, they've had business tycoons, they've had all kinds of government officials, prime ministers coming out of that family. They have been extremely successful over generations. And the de' Medici family is still around, and some of them are still in banking, and there is some money still in the extended family. This guy was one of the most well-known. His name is Lorenzo. He was also called Lorenzo the Magnificent. He pretty much ran Florence. He was the mayor. He was the town council. Whatever he said went. Now, how does that all connect to Michelangelo? Michelangelo, interestingly enough, was invited to come to his School of the Arts. It is it functions in his home. And this is a Verrocchio statue of Lorenzo, but the school functions in his home, where all of the young students, like Michelangelo, and there are probably about 20 of them, they all are learning different artistic things and different creative things. What's really interesting is that the home also is well known because you're going to have wonderful meals there. And so government officials or well-known people, when they come through town, they're going to stop there and they're going to be invited to dinner. All of the students also could come to dinner. So you're associating with some of the most high-profile, powerful people in Italy and in Central Europe, because they're all coming through to see this guy. And Michelangelo was in the middle of all of that for about 2.5 years. And so not only did he get a great artistic education, he also got a great cultural and social education. And that's something that you couldn't have ever paid for, because it's just so rare. And what a wonderful, wonderful thing. Now, while he was there, this is Lorenzo, this is Michelangelo as a young student. One of the artistic assignments was to create this. It was actually the head of a faun, or a mythical combination man-animal. And he first created it, and Lorenzo didn't like the shape of the mouth, so he took it back and worked through the night restructuring the entire lower part of the face and brought it back. And the next day, Lorenzo said, yeah, that's it. That's what I want. He's one of the youngest students there. It absolutely blew people, all the other students, away, that he has got such an incredible, incredible talent, even at a very, very young age. Because this is out of stone. Stone. So you're using a hammer, you're using a chisel, you're using a file, and you're using a toothbrush to kind of clean it up and polish it afterwards. He literally is incredible. Yeah, and it becomes obvious very early in his career. Now, while he was there, one of the other students was a young man named Pietro Terragiano. Pietro was later described as a bully. And Pietro decided that he was jealous of Michelangelo. And Pietro, with the mentality of a bully, confronted him. And Michelangelo didn't take kindly to being disrespected. And Pietro doubled up his fist and hit Michelangelo. It's why, and it broke right here. It broke the bridge of the nose. And there was no way then, the medical advancements weren't even begun to rebuild the nose. See, that could have been rebuilt today. They couldn't even consider that. And so all of his life, he had a flattened nose. And it was one of those things where he was very embarrassed, not only physically, but it seemed to have also affected him psychologically. It really did. And he always struggled with a sense of inferiority, which from our perspective is really hard to understand, because in our perspective, he might be the most famous, most accomplished artist the world has ever known. And he struggled with an inferiority complex, which is really amazing. Let me back up just a minute before I get to the next one. I told you that he was at Lorenzo's school for 2.5 years, and I say that because Lorenzo got sick and died. And that just sent the whole world into a tailspin, because he was in his mid-40s, and that was, even then, that was considered abnormally young. And he died, and the school was dismissed because the one of the sons that took over for Lorenzo wasn't nearly as interested in the arts as the father had been. And so everybody just kind of was left on their own to try and find what to do. And Michelangelo went back home, and he was just kind of looking for different things to do because he knew what he wanted to do, but most people don't stand around hiring sculptors. They don't stand around hiring, artists. There's going to have to be an income level. And so he was looking to find his way in the world. And this is be about 1496, 97, 98, in that time frame. Now, take a look at this. This is a mountain range. It looks like they've cut squares out of the mountain. I want you to look real closely at this picture because down here, these are earth-moving equipment pieces. They're not little toys. They are gigantic full size. To give you an idea of the size of this, where is this and what is this? Let me back up to the map to give you an idea of where it is, and then we'll go back and I'll show it to you again and tell you what it is. It is stone. Yes. Okay, here is Florence. That rock quarry is right here. And right down through here is a series of mountains. And right on the edge of this mountain is the most famous rock quarry in the world for Carrara marble. And much of what Michelangelo worked with is Carrara marble. That's where it's from, okay? And you've probably heard of that term, but now I'm going to go back and show you what it really looks like. And there we go. But they literally shave squares, and since the 1570s, they would drill holes and they would drop gunpowder down, and they would try to create controlled explosions to break out chunks or pieces. But that's where it's from. And how interesting, especially when you consider these things, like that earth mover right here, that little piece is 30 feet long and it's 15 feet tall. The tires are larger than I am tall. No. This is today. But this is the mountain where he would get the marble, okay? So that is really, to kind of give you an idea, that is where it comes from. And it's still where it comes from, because Carrara marble, similar to this, that's the number one place in the world where it comes from. And that's where it came from during his lifetime. Isn't that interesting? I'm sorry? Okay, she just asked, how far deep does it go? They're hoping. They don't want to run out anytime soon. Yeah, but it is obviously, they're just cut sections of mountains over. And they've been doing this for over 700 years. And there are whole mountains that have been hollowed out because of all of the excavation over the years. But I wanted you to see that to kind of give you an idea where this stuff comes from. Okay. Now, this is a saying by Michelangelo. And I've always, in trying to decide, and this is why I don't have an artistic mind, his saying is this: I saw the angel in marble and carved until I set him free. I don't stand in front of a block of marble and see an angel in there and then carve until I get down to the angel. I see a big ugly piece of rock. I don't have the artistic vision. He did. And he could see the finished product, and he literally carved until he created the finished product. that to me is amazing, just amazing, that you would have a vision that you could see that. In the late 1490s, after the death of Lorenzo de' Medici, this guy came onto the stage in Florence. This guy's name is Savonarola. Savonarola is a hellfire and damnation preacher and was convinced the entire world was going to hell, and he was going to make sure and send them in that direction. And he was demanding that everybody be exactly like how wonderful he was. And what's really interesting about this guy is that Michelangelo said, throughout my life, I could hear the sound of the preacher. This guy had a dramatic effect on the world of that time and on Michelangelo. And when I get later on in some of the pictures of the Last Judgment, for example, when he did that magnificent painting scene on the back side of the Sistine Chapel, that vision is something that this guy was literally explaining and espousing. And he had humongous effect on the time frame and on Michelangelo. Now, in about 1501, Michelangelo was hired by a cardinal to create one of the most famous statues ever, and it's called the Pietà. And it is the picture of, or the statue of, Mary holding the body of Christ after the crucifixion. Did that event ever actually take place? We don't know. We don't know. Could it? Well, maybe technically, but we don't know, because the Bible is so limited on a lot of details that we would like to know a lot more about. We really would. We would like to have a whole lot more detail. And anyway, that statue is absolute, and it's beautiful, and it's shiny, and it's gorgeous, and it's lovely, and it's smooth. And you have to remember, this is all one block of rock that he took a hammer and a chisel and started beating the rock to shape all of this, to create the folds of the fabric. That was one big, ugly piece of rock. And he created it out of that. You may remember in May of 1971, some idiot on a tour in the Vatican came walking up as part of a tour group, and they all looked at this lovely statue and started to walk away, and he jumped back and pulled out a hammer and walked up right here on her left hand and started beating on the fingers of her left hand and broke several fingers before the Vatican guards got over there and stopped him. He was brought to trial. There were no real laws that addressed an attack of a piece of art. He got 6 months in jail, and that was it. If it were me, I would have had somebody take a hammer to his fingers. But it was just unbelievable. And so they had to, and most of the pieces were there, but you can see some cracks in where they've glued the hand back together. That statue took him almost a year to make. Since it was finished in 1502, it was part of a cardinal hired him to build that for that cardinal's tomb. And what's interesting about that is that statue has been moved 5 different times, and it is now on permanent display in the Vatican. It was also in 1987, 88, 89, the Vatican allowed some pieces of art to go on a tour, and this was one of the pieces, and it came to New York City, and it came to Washington, D.C. And anyway, but it's pretty highly prized and regarded and guarded, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful piece of artwork. It really is. And last thing you need to know about this, he was 25 when he finished building this. And a lot of people that did not know him well couldn't believe that he did it. And so after it got put on display, he heard a discussion where people were saying, oh, it couldn't have been him because he's too young, and nah, it couldn't have been him. He was so upset that he snuck in at night. And on her dress, on her fold, there's a sash that goes right here. He got with his chisel and his hammer, he wrote his name, Michelangelo, right there on that statue. It's the only piece of work he ever did that he signed. It's that one. And it's carved right across the front of her chest. And but it is a gorgeous, gorgeous piece of artwork. No, it's 7 feet tall and it weighs over 300 pounds. So if you're going to move it, it's going to be, you're going to need help. Maybe both of you will have to go. You know, okay? So, all righty. This is one of his most famous statues, and you're familiar with this statue. And yes, I purposefully cut it off. That's enough, okay? Because he somehow believed that that the human body was something to be honored and treasured. I always thought that he just had didn't have an affinity for enough clothing or something. But anyway, this is 17 feet tall. 17 feet tall, okay? Now, this was a block of marble, and it was badly shaped, and 2 other sculptors had tried to work on it. And they had messed it up, and they were afraid that they were going to break it to where it would break in half or something. And so he was hired to come and see, can you salvage this and do anything with this? And so he did. He did. And it's literally shaped like this, and it's just an unusual statue. But for years it was in front of the Uffizi Museum in Florence, and it's on display in the Florence Academy, and it is a gigantic statue and very interesting. But it symbolizes the humanity and the dignity of man, and it symbolizes how Florence is willing to stand on its own against the world. Because Florence had become, the term politically is a city-state, and they had tried to become almost their own country, is what that means. It's a city, a country within a city within a country, and it's all by itself. And it was used to try and symbolize all of that. But what an incredible statue. And that he worked on that from 1502 to 1505. And so it wasn't a quick thing. And if it's 17 feet tall, you're going to need scaffolding around it to get up high enough to work on it. It's not going to be an easy thing to even work on, let alone finish. This guy is one of the more interesting popes ever. His name was Pope Julius II. He was the pope from 1503 to 1513. He was incredibly well-to-do. He also was nicknamed, and I've always loved this, the warrior pope. Well, now that's kind of a contradiction in terms, isn't it? Wouldn't you think that a pope would be a man of peace? And that doesn't necessarily imply warrior or war. He led troops in the field, and he captured several and added them to the control of the papal states. He was quite a unique individual, and he loved art, and he wanted to transform the city of Rome to not only the spiritual capital of the world, but the artistic capital of the world. Okay, well, to do that, you're going to need money, as in lots more money needs to be coming in. And so they created a concept, and that concept was known as indulgences. Indulgences are kind of an interesting thing. Yes. Indulgences are very interesting because that means that you go into your priest and you simply explain that you plan on having a wild weekend, and you have to list potential activities, and then the priest assigns an amount of money, and you pay that amount of money, and then you're not responsible for your activities. It's known as buying your way out of hell, okay? It's a get out of hell card free kind of thing. And sounds a little bit of a stretch of the concept, okay? But there was tons of money that came in, all over the place that came in, because not only can you do it for yourself, you can also do it for your grandparents or your uncle or your aunt or anybody else that may be already in hell. You can buy them out. What a deal. What a deal. Unbelievable. Anyway, for a while, there was a lot of money that came in, and then there was an uproar forever saying, nah, that can't be right. And anyway, while it was going on, there was tons of money that came in, and he's right in the middle of all of this. And this picture shows what Julius II, is going to do. St. Peter's Basilica, of which we know of in the Vatican, the original one was built in the 4th century. By the early 1500s, it's pretty much a mess. And rather than just rebuild, they wanted to start over. So Julius hires, and this is Bramante. Bramante is one of the premier architects in the world. He hires Michelangelo, and he hires Raphael to come and help design and build St. Peter's Basilica. Now, okay, interesting, because Michelangelo is already working on his tomb, and I'll show you that in a few minutes, and he's a little bit busy, and really? Bramante's design was this. What's interesting about this is that Bramante was convinced that all of the money coming into the church should go to him, Bramante, to help build this. Well, needless to say, everybody else that's getting money to do other things is not real happy with that suggestion. And so you had, and I'm going to say this kindly, you had confrontation. Big time, between Michelangelo and Bramante and all kinds of other people. And Bramante was kind of not a pleasant guy to get along with. It was my way or the highway kind of thing. Okay, but that's what he wanted to build. And he kept working on this until 1514, when he unexpectedly died. And then Raphael was put in charge. Well, now, this is the most famous painting of Raphael, in my opinion. This is called the School of Athens. And did this event even take place? Probably not, because Raphael used Leonardo da Vinci as Socrates, and he used several people that he knew as Plato and Aristotle, and because Plato's academy existed for over 1,000 years, and Raphael was trying to create the academic learning. And so Raphael is known as a great painter. After Bramante died, Raphael was drafted to come and take over the construction project of St. Peter's Basilica. Well, that went well for 6 years, and then Raphael died in 1520, and they went through all kinds of people to take over the project. This is kind of an interesting picture that was actually painted in 1889 of Michelangelo in his studio in Rome, and Pope Julius II is coming in to check in on and see how things are. Why? Because the Moses statue is part of Julius's tomb, and Julius wanted that to be a big part of it. And it is, still. And there it is. This statue is 8 feet tall. Now, please remember, this is a block of stone. That to get the curls in the beard, you've got a hammer and a chisel. And you're beating rock to try and shape rock to make it look like hair of a beard or folds of a garment. Unbelievable. And people have always asked on this statue, okay, what's the deal with the horns? What's the deal with the horns? Well, according to Jerome, who translated the Vulgate in the 4th century, they're not horns. They are light radiating out of the Spirit. Okay, where do we get the concept that horns are of the devil then? That came about in about the early 1400s, and I just blanked on the name. I'll think about it in a minute. There's a German author who, don't get old, people, because stuff keeps migrating. And it's so frustrating. And you want to just reach out and grab it and say, get back here, come on, okay? And I'll come out with it in a minute. But, I can even see the book in my bookcase at home. I can even see the book. I can see Anyway, that concept of horns of the devil doesn't come out until about the 1400s. So when Michelangelo was doing this, he was still under the assumption that horns was radiating inner spiritual light. Okay? That's what that's about. And a very impressive statue. But look at this. This is Julius II. This is the front of his tomb. This is Moses. Moses is 8 feet tall. Now, does that look kind of like the tombs that you've got designed for yourself? His checkbook may have been a little bit bigger than yours. You think? Unbelievable. And all of these figurines, Michelangelo did them all. What's interesting is Michelangelo started working on this in 1503. Julius died in 1513. Michelangelo finished in 1547. It took a while because people kept coming along and hiring him to do other things. And Julius is dead. I'll get back to it. And eventually he did. But unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And that's why I love this picture, so you can kind of see the comparison. Okay. This is actually the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Julius II called in Michelangelo and said, I want you to paint the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Michelangelo said, listen carefully, and walked out. Walked out. He said, I'm not even remotely interested. I'm a sculptor. I am not a painter. I don't like painting. Because to paint that thing, that is called fresco painting. You know what fresco painting is? Fresco painting is you take a color wheel, about this big around, and you have spots of color all the way around, and you put a big blotch of wet cement in the middle of it. You take a putty knife, and you take some of your color, and you scoop it around a little corner of cement, and you mix it all together so it's that color. Then you get up onto the ceiling, and with your putty knife, you slap it onto the ceiling in the shape that you want. If you mix it too wet, it falls off. If you mix it too dry, it flakes off. It's got to be absolutely perfect. The problem with all of that? The Sistine Chapel is 46 feet wide and 133 feet long, and it's 65 feet off the floor to get to the ceiling. There are over 300 figures in that. All kinds of people went to Pope Julius II and said, get Michelangelo to do this. Why? Because they are jealous of Michelangelo, and they don't want Michelangelo's competition on other projects. They figure if he's going to be doing this, he's going to be busy for 10 years. He's not going to have time to do anything else. Michelangelo says, I'm not a painter. Julius II said, I don't care. You're the best there is. You're going to paint it. So he did. He did. This is the story of the Old Testament. It literally is. It starts with the creation. It moves up, and I'm going to show you some of the closer pictures of this. This one is God creating the sun and the moon. Okay? This one is the very famous painting where God is reaching out with his fingertips and touching the fingertips of Adam, symbolically giving Adam the breath of life. Okay? And this is Adam and Eve in the garden, and they are partaking of the forbidden fruit. This is the banishment from the garden, and it just goes on and on. This is the story of Noah and the deluge, and you go right around, and it is the story of the Old Testament. And there are all kinds of Old Testament prophets and events all the way through there. It is absolutely unbelievable. It was supposed to take him 10 years. He did it in 4.5. But again, 15 hours a day is a normal work day for him. Sometimes that will go up to 18 hours a day. He often didn't bathe for a week. He often didn't even change clothes. He just took off his working smock and laid down and just collapsed and had food brought to him. It's unbelievable what this is. Okay? To give you an idea of size, from that wall to here would be about the distance from here to here. Okay? So maybe you've got a concept of what this is about and how difficult that would be. This is God touching the finger of Adam, symbolically giving life, the breath of life, to Adam. This is one of the symbols or the guardians all around the edge, and there are 12 guardians around the edge. This is God creating the sun and the moon, way in the beginning of Genesis. And this is Adam and Eve being tempted by the snake and partaking of the forbidden fruit, and later being cast out of the Garden of Eden. And this is the flood. I have no idea where Noah is, but it says it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and so everybody is simply trying to get out of the rising flood waters. And how difficult that would be, and I think that they were all clothing challenged or something. I don't know, but how interesting. How interesting, and the detail is absolutely amazing. I love this little picture because it gives you an idea of what it would have been like to actually paint. Look at the bottom of this. That is Pope Julius II and the cardinal that was assisting him. Not only do you have to paint the ceiling, you've got to build the scaffolding to get you there. So he had to design and build all of the scaffolding, and then you lay on your back 3 feet away from the ceiling, and you're painting with wet cement. That is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I can't even imagine. Can't even imagine doing that. 4.5 years. Years. And he created the greatest artistic accomplishment our world has ever seen. He almost looks haunted. He really does. Which is a very interesting concept. Let me introduce you to Pope Paul III. Pope Paul III became Pope in 1533 and ruled until 1549. He is also an art aficionado, and the man that had preceded him was a pope by the name of Pope Clement VI. Pope Clement had contacted Michelangelo and said, I want you to come because you've done a great job on the ceiling. I now want you to come and do a great job on the back wall. And I'm sure Michelangelo is going, yeah, right, you know. And then Clement died, and I'm sure Michelangelo was thrilled. And then Pope Paul III called him up and said, no, you get back here. We want more. We want more. Now, this is one edge of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. So the ceiling goes this way. This is the wall, the end wall. For the first 2.5 years, they had to rebuild the wall, and they had to angle it. So instead of a flat wall, they had to bring it out at about a 20-degree angle, and they had to put new surface on it so it would accept this style of painting. It took them 2.5 years just to get the wall ready. And he started working on the wall in 1536 until 1541. Now, this indicates the final judgment. And in fact, that's obviously the name of it. Final judgment, where Jesus is judging all of mankind. This line right here, from here up, is to indicate, and I'm just going to say the term heaven, okay, where people have been judged as good and worthy of getting into heaven. These people, from here in this circle, are part of the people that are coming up in lines to get judged. And these people, from here down, have been judged. They're not going to be sent up. They're going to be sent in the opposite direction, okay? And that's what all of this is about. I'm going to show you closer pictures of all of this, but this is the overview so that you've got an idea of what has happened in this painting. Now, this is kind of a closer view. And here is the heaven line, and these people are all waiting. Okay, what's going to happen here? And these people are not going to heaven. They're going in the opposite direction. And they are literally being pushed down toward the depths. And you can see the haunting look. This is an interesting part of that. According to Greek mythology, there is a man by the name of Charon, and he literally drives the boat down the river Styx into hell. And these people have been assigned to be taken into hell, and some of his helpers are pushing the people out. Come on, you have to go. And oh, I don't care if you don't want to go. You have to go, and are pushing them out. And you can see none of them are too happy. Understandably. These people have been judged worthy and are being taken up, and they are literally being assisted and pulled up into heaven because they have been judged worthy of being able to go into heaven. Okay? Now, let's go back for just a minute. One more. Okay. When he was working on this, Pope Paul was very impressed with what Michelangelo could be doing and should be doing, but Pope Paul put a cardinal in charge of the money. Because obviously to do this, you're going to have to hire assistants, you're going to have all kinds of supplies, you're going to be constantly paying out, so there's got to be money flow. A cardinal was put in charge of making sure that Michelangelo didn't misspend the money. Michelangelo was about as honest a person as ever, and he was always afraid that he wasn't giving you your money's worth. And that's why he worked so many hours, and that's why often he would work without assistance, because he was afraid he wasn't giving you the money that he thought you deserved. That cardinal was constantly berating and hassling Michelangelo over every expenditure imaginable. But Michelangelo got him back. Wow, did he ever. When the grand opening, and this was unveiled for the first time, everybody came in. Government officials, church officials, obviously the Pope, but all the cardinals, all kinds of everybody. Anybody that was important at all were invited to come and see the unveiling, and they all did. And everybody's walking around, ooh, wow, wow, and it's impressive. There's no question, it's impressive. Okay, because it's 45 feet tall. It's unbelievable. Now, what's interesting is that cardinal is walking around, and he happens to just, because it's close down to where he's walking at, the height of the level, and he can see all of these people, and even lower down in these people, and he notices a face that looks familiar. Michelangelo has painted the cardinal's face on one of the people that is in hell. Okay? And the cardinal is not happy. Imagine that. And goes storming up to the Pope, demanding that the Pope demand that Michelangelo repaint a whole section of this. And the Pope says, look, I'm a little busy. There's all kinds of people here. And the Pope finally agrees to go look at it. And so the Pope walks over and stands in front and looks at the painted figure, and then looks at the cardinal, and looks at the painted figure, and looks at the cardinal, back and forth 3 or 4 times, and finally turns to the cardinal and says, I have no jurisdiction in hell. And left it. It's still there. It's still there. And I always thought that really showed that Pope Paul III had a sense of humor. I thought that was pretty good. I really did. So, anyway. This is actually a painting by Michelangelo. This is not a fresco painting. This is a real painting. And it's on the wall of a church in Italy. And this is called The Conversion of St. Paul. And if you're familiar with the story in Acts chapter 9, where Paul is on the road to Damascus, and all of a sudden he is stopped, and a light comes down from heaven, and the people that he is with can see the light, but they can't hear the voice. And Paul, which is this figure down here, can actually hear the voice. And he is called to repentance. And he turns from Saul, the persecutor of the Christians, to Paul, one of the all-time great missionaries of ever, because of this event. And this is Jesus in heaven creating all of the example of what we should be. And it's a beautiful, beautiful painting, but I included it to kind of give you an idea of the array of talent that Michelangelo has. This is also a drawing or a sketch, and it is Jupiter and Cupid. The reason I included this is because this is an example of an artistic form, and that form is known as tirabilità, and that is an Italian term, and what that means is twisted motion. All of Michelangelo's figures, and regardless of the style that he's painting them in, they all look like they're almost in motion. And that is entitled tirabilità, and twisted motion. And you can see they all, and the muscles tense, and everything is literally in motion. How did he get the ability to do that? Way back when he was a student at Lorenzo's school, one of the night classes, he had permission to go into the local Catholic church. Now, this is before morgues were part of anything. If a person died, they were taken to the church. And if a body was claimed, then the family came and the body was prepared and buried in a certain section of the cemetery. Fine. If the body was never claimed, and sometimes that happens, and the body was never claimed, then the body is prepared in an unmarked grave, and very little expense is spent on that. Michelangelo got permission. He's not the only one that did this. Michelangelo got permission to go in to the morgue area and cut open the bodies to see how the human body works. Leonardo da Vinci did the same thing. Many, many great artists did, because when you do this, what happens? What muscle groups are affected? Well, they opened up the bodies to see what muscle groups are affected. That's how you get such detail, because he knew exactly how muscle structure works. And all by itself, that's hard to even fathom. That really, really is. And this is another example. And this one actually is a drawing that was used in the Sistine Chapel. And it's in the far corner, and I could go all the way back to that slide and show you, and you can see but you can see it is literally twisted motion, or terribilita, and you can see the muscle tensing, and you can see the back muscles, and you can see all kinds of things, because he understood how a human body works and functions. Okay? In 1547, the Pope came back to him and said, Pope Paul III said, you know, we haven't been able to get anybody to finish St. Peter's Basilica. You were in on the original meetings. We want you to come and be in charge of the construction and finish it. Michelangelo wasn't happy. And he said, the only reason I will agree to that is in honor of St. Peter. And he took much of Bramante's design, and this is St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. That is the dome that Michelangelo helped design, and the column structure. And the interior, much of what Michelangelo did, and he helped work on it till the rest of his life, in addition to everything else. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. This is one of the last statues that he worked on. And this statue has always been assuming this is Nicodemus helping take the body of Christ off the cross and down and eventually get it into the tomb. Or is it Michelangelo asking, is my art good enough to honor my Lord? He died in 1464, mainly of old age and working too hard. 1564. And without a doubt, our world is a much better place because of Michelangelo. There was a television station in Japan in the early 1990s that went to the Vatican and said, we will finance the cleaning of the ceiling if you will allow us to film it. The Vatican said, okay, that's a good idea. Because after 500 years, it's got smoke all over and a lot of smoke damage. Once it got cleaned and people saw the color that Michelangelo had put together all those years ago, it transformed how people thought, even more so how they thought about who he was and what he did. He truly, in my opinion, is the world's greatest artist. And the Sistine Chapel ceiling is the world's greatest artistic accomplishment. Thank you for your time today.